Experts believe that a free agent quarterback reunion for the New Orleans Saints could be in store in 2023. Why Teddy Bridgewater would and wouldn't be a good choice for the New Orleans Saints in the open market. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget we're free and available on all podcast apps, including on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. Have you ever dreamt of becoming an NFL GM and managing your own football franchise? This game is definitely for you. To download it, head over to ultimate-gm.com or look it up in your app stores. Our listeners will get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On, all caps, in the game stores. We got that coming up. We'll tell you a little bit more about that later. On today's episode, though, we're going to be breaking down a couple of different things. How impactful have screens been, and could a lack of efficiency be the reason why the New Orleans Saints aren't running as many screens? We'll take a look at how Week 16 could potentially be big for rookie left tackle Trevor Penning, especially after the news that Cesar Ruiz is headed to injured reserve, effectively ending his season, how those two things correlate. But first, Bill Barnwell over at ESPN believes that there's a chance that Teddy Bridgewater, former New Orleans Saints quarterback, former Minnesota Vikings quarterback, former Carolina Panthers quarterback, so on and so forth, could actually end up back in New Orleans over the course of this offseason. Bill Barnwell did a great breakdown of every single team's quarterback situation, which ones could be in the market for a new quarterback, which ones could be in the market for a draft quarterback, who would be returning talent, all of that good stuff. And one of the things that Bill Barnwell talked about was the potential for the Saints to go out and find some kind of low-cost vets over the course of this offseason, including Teddy Bridgewater, who would make a lot of sense because he would be a return for the New Orleans Saints. I will also mention that in this scenario, he also had the New Orleans Saints moving on from Jameis Winston due to salary cap constraints. So allowing Jameis Winston to hit the market, be about $12 million in dead cap, but they'd save about $4.5 million toward the salary cap there. But let's be real. If New Orleans Saints and Jameis Winston part ways over the course of the offseason, it will not be because of a salary cap issue. It will simply be because Jameis Winston very likely wants to go and find an opportunity elsewhere because it's clear that he's not going to have it in New Orleans. So with Teddy Bridgewater being the name, would he be a good asset for the New Orleans Saints? I'm going to give you reasons why, and I'm going to give you reasons why not. And actually, let's start off with the reasons for why not. The first of which is that returning Teddy Bridgewater to New Orleans, as fun as it would really just be another step in their old footsteps yet again. It would be the same idea of maintaining continuity, maintaining cohesion, keeping the band together, all those other things. It's just retracing their previous steps. Is that really the direction that the New Orleans Saints need to go? I, as you all know, have been a bit of an advocate for the New Orleans Saints really kind of going in a different direction. I'm not in the blow it up and start all over camp because we know that that doesn't actually work in the NFL, but just when it comes to their offensive approach and maybe rebuilding or reframing a little bit about what they're doing on that side of the ball as opposed to trying to relive past success. So with that, I don't know if going back to a Teddy Bridgewater is really the best idea, because in that case, you're really just kind of retreading at that point. It doesn't take the idea of a rookie quarterback off the table, however. So this is where it couldn't make sense. Yeah, you bring Teddy Bridgewater back, but is the intent really for him to be your starter? That's probably not necessarily the case, especially if you're able to bring in a rookie quarterback soon after that. So if you bring in a rookie quarterback, you have a guy like Teddy Bridgewater who has operated in the system a little bit, who can help translate what the previous system was and how it's changing into the new system. So he can kind of help be that, no pun intended, but bridge in between what was the New Orleans Saints of old into what the New Orleans Saints of the future could potentially look like. It also doesn't rule out the potential return of an Andy Dalton. I believe that the New Orleans Saints, considering the fact that they're wrapping up the season with Andy Dalton here, will very likely be interested in returning him in 2023. That couldn't be, or that wouldn't be a bad scenario for a rookie quarterback to come in and have an Andy Dalton and then also have a Teddy Bridgewater to lean on, two veteran quarterbacks who have done it all, seen it all, and have an opportunity to then help that younger quarterback develop. A lot of folks have been sort of standoffish about the idea of a young quarterback because, let's face it, the New Orleans Saints have never really shown an ability to be able to develop drafted quarterbacks. But if you make some changes and you decide you want to go that way and you build the staff towards developing a young quarterback, it opens up opportunities for you in that side of the market. And having those veteran quarterbacks also as the backup plan allows you to help them. Look at what happened when the Miami Dolphins found somebody that believed in Tua Tagovailoa in Mike McDaniel, and then also brought in a guy like Teddy Bridgewater to be the veteran backup. Obviously, that worked out really well. Now, we have to give Mike McDaniel a ton of credit there. This won't be the last time we talk about the Dolphins in today's episode, by the way. But we have to give Mike McDaniel a ton of credit there, as well as the staff for what they did. But having the veteran presence at the position certainly has helped Tua Tagovailoa as well. The other thing that I will say is that if the New Orleans Saints decide to move forward with Dennis Allen, this makes sense. If the New Orleans Saints somehow get Sean Payton to come back, this also makes sense, right? So that's another area in which this would be a good potential, because obviously in that case, you're not looking at changing very much. You're not looking at changing your full-on direction. You're wanting to continue to try to reprise the song of the past. And so in that case, if that's the goal, which I don't really agree is the best goal, but if that's the goal, Teddy Bridgewater is a quarterback that has knowledge of how not only the system works, but how to make it work out on the field. He was 5-0 for the New Orleans Saints in place of Drew Brees just a few years ago. That's what got him the contract in Carolina, eventually got him the contract in Miami. So I could easily see Teddy Bridgewater back. And there's a big part of me that believes that if Sean Payton would have been the head coach in 2022, Teddy Bridgewater probably would have never ended up in Miami. He would have probably been back in New Orleans. I could absolutely see that. So that's another piece of like the does Sean Payton return thing, which again, I think is unlikely. But if he did, Teddy Bridgewater makes a ton of sense. If you continue to move forward with Dennis Allen, Teddy Bridgewater makes a ton of sense. But the idea has to be bringing him back as a means of helping to translate a new system or translate the growth from a system that he's familiar with into a new system, as opposed to continuously trying to relive the success of the past in Sean Payton's old offense. Unless, of course, you've got Sean Payton running that offense. Coming up next, Cesar Ruiz headed to injured reserve, why that could mean a big week 16 for Trevor Penning and what it means for the run game and the passing game, because it ain't great. We'll break all that down as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. And today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. I'm super excited about our partnership and our sponsor for today's episode. This is a mobile game, Ultimate Football GM, that you can find in all your app stores. You can also find it at ultimate-gm.com. It basically allows you to become an NFL general manager and manage a football franchise the way that you want to. You can do it by hiring the right coaches and coordinators, trading players. You can sign players in free agency, make draft picks, manage the salary cap, manage expenses, upgrade facilities, whole bunch of stuff. Literally everything that that other game that you're probably very familiar with continues to miss the ball on when it comes to, building out your own franchise. Ultimate Football GM scratches that itch for you and absolutely satisfies the appetite for sure. It's absolutely awesome. I'm addicted to it. I love it. I'm playing it all the time. All of this is all set within a challenging sort of like realistic world as well. Ultimate Football GM completely free. And playable offline so that you can play as you go and as much as you want to when you want to. None of the timeouts or anything like that you have to worry about. So go ahead and check them out today. You can find it over at ultimate-gm.com, and Locked On Saints listeners are going to get a 100% free boost to their franchise when you use the promo code Locked On in all caps in the game store. That's Locked On in all caps. So make sure that you check it out today. Once again, to download it, you can head to ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. Today's episode also brought to you by our friends over at Audible. Audible is releasing a slate of new football podcasts that you are sure to love. We know that you're going to love them. That's why you're actually going to be able to find an episode from the League podcast available as a bonus episode on Locked On NFL. Head over right now and check it out. Narrated by Super Bowl champion and one of my favorite personalities in all of sports, Richard Sherman, as well as sports broadcaster Taylor Rooks, who I also absolutely love. The League is an 8-part docuseries that focuses on the bizarre, sort of inspirational and unlikely stories connected to your favorite sport, pro football. The bonus episode that you're going to hear is really, really cool because it's all about, it's an episode called The Way of the Cowboy. So it's all about this incredible story to where the 1977 Dallas Cowboys brought in Dan Ensenado, who was Bruce Lee's protege, to basically teach their defense martial arts, which then ended up changing and creating a whole new approach to the way that the league trained as a whole. So head over to Locked On NFL for a bonus episode of The League, or catch the full series wherever you get your podcasts available. Now, Audible, get in the game. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. New Orleans Saints right guard Cesar Ruiz headed to injured reserve. Why? This could end up being a big thing for Trevor Penning, big opportunity for Trevor Penning. And what does it mean for the New Orleans Saints offense? We're breaking all that down as we continue on with today's episode. We appreciate you so much for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day. For your second listen, make sure you go check out Locked On Sports today as well. All right, so Cesar Ruiz headed to injured reserve is a big deal, and we're going to get to how that impacts the run game as well as the passing game. But one of the things that I want to look at here is how this could potentially impact Trevor Penning. The New Orleans Saints rookie left tackle was developing and getting better over the course of the offseason. Dealt with that severe turf toe injury that he had to have surgery on. He went into some gruesome detail with us in the locker room one day about what exactly happened, what had to get repaired. That's on YouTube. You can actually find it on one of my YouTube shorts with him kind of breaking down that injury. But the thing that I want to focus on here is why this potentially opens up an opportunity for Trevor Penning to get back out on the field now that he's healthy, or be out on the field now that he's healthy. The sort of easy solution around how to deal with Cesar Ruiz's injury at right guard is to just plug Calvin Throckmorton in there. But there is another option. And maybe this is just me being like too galaxy brain and trying to beat the Saints to the punch of doing something exciting or whatever. But another opportunity here would be to actually take James Hurst, kick him inside to right guard where he has played for the Saints before and has played well for the Saints before, and then start Trevor Penning at left tackle. Why would you do this as opposed to just moving Calvin Throckmorton in? You get 5 starting caliber players as opposed to somebody that's been a perennial backup for you, which is not a bad thing on Calvin Throckmorton's part. That's his role, is to be a backup. And so I think if you kick James Hurst back into right guard, you have a starting caliber right guard in James Hurst. The Saints couldn't do this earlier on in the season because then they lose a starting caliber left tackle, which is way, well, I don't want to say more important, but is a high priority position. Now you have Trevor Penning, who's healthy, who could have potentially been your starter to open up the season at left tackle or become the starter at some point over the season, which is what I thought would be most likely. And you get an opportunity to look at Trevor Penning in that scenario. The other thing that I'll mention is that we asked Pete Carmichael last week about, do you know sort of if this player goes down on the offensive line, who immediately goes in and all that, when we were kind of asking about Trevor Penning and any opportunities that he might get. And one of the things that he said was that, yeah, we know, if this player goes down, then we know this player goes in. But then there's also scenarios in which if this player goes down, then we move somebody over. And it kind of indicated a move kind of like this. So this is why I say I might be just trying to beat the Saints to the punch too much here. I might be reading in between the lines too much here. But this could end up being an important step forward for Trevor Penning and the New Orleans Saints in their evaluation of how they spent that first round pick. So just something to keep an eye out on. We'll see over at practice throughout the week if Trevor Penning is getting in the mix there with first team, or if we see James Hurst kicking in on the inside. We'll have an idea of those things. But also, like I mentioned, completely possible that they just start Calvin Throckmorton at right guard and then move on with James Hurst still at left tackle. But I think getting a look at Trevor Penning here at this point in the season, not a bad thing. Not a bad thing at all. So what does losing Cesar Ruiz mean for the run game? What does it mean for the passing game? Well, in short, it's bad. It's not great. But let's talk about why. So in the run game, Alvin Kamara has gotten the majority of his 640 rushing yards to the outside, 344 to the right? So he's done most of his stuff to the right side of the offensive line, 296 yards to the left side of the offensive line. It's not a lot of yardage. It's not a big difference, but I can tell you exactly where that difference is made up. It's made up between, or running in the lane between, Cesar Ruiz and Ryan Ramczyk. That's where that is. And then the rest of the yardage is made up by the one jet sweep that we've seen from Alvin Kamara all season, which went for 13 yards in last week's game. But the difference between running in between, let's say, the left tackle and left guard, 58 yards, and then running in between the right guard and right tackle, 86 yards, is nearly 30 yards. It's nearly 30 yards of a difference there. He's also run for 112 yards in between the center and right guard, in between Eric McCoy and Cesar Ruiz. Also run for 112 yards, exact same total, in between Eric McCoy and the left guard as well. But that's a big deal. So the majority of his yardage has come on the inside and to the right. Like if you were to break it down into sort of quadrants, to where you're talking about like inside and to the right, inside and to the left, outside and to the left, outside and to the right, the majority of his yardage has come inside and to the right, to either the right or left side of Cesar Ruiz. So losing Cesar Ruiz has a lot of impact on your run game. It doesn't stop there, unfortunately. It has a lot of impact on your passing game as well. Of the 6 offensive linemen who have had the most snaps for the New Orleans Saints, James Hurst, Ryan Ramczyk, Andrus Peat, Calvin Throckmorton, Cesar Ruiz, and Eric McCoy, Cesar Ruiz has the second fewest pressures allowed of those 6, with just 14 pressures over the course of 14 games. He's also only one of 2 players that have played all 14 games so far this season, Ryan Ramczyk being the other. Ryan Ramczyk, though, has given up 6 additional pressures. They've both given up a total of 3 sacks, which is second most for the team, just behind James Hurst with 4. So they're around the same when it comes to sacks, but when it comes to consistent pressures, Cesar Ruiz has given up one of them things a game. Don't also lose sight of the fact that Cesar Ruiz started all 17 games last year. He was the only player last year to play in every single game or to start every single snap, whatever it was. And then now he has started every single game so far this season as well, both at right guard and even starting at center in Tampa Bay. Now he's going to miss his first career game after making 31 consecutive starts. He was the only healthy portion of the New Orleans Saints team. And now he's hurt and very likely done, well, very much done for the rest of the season, right? Injured reserve requires you to be out for 4 weeks. There's 3 weeks left in the season. So unless the Saints make the playoffs and win a game in the playoffs, it doesn't seem likely that Cesar Ruiz works his way back. And some of the initial reports, Jeff Duncan and others, have said that it doesn't feel like good news, the Cesar Ruiz foot injury. So this is something that could potentially push into the offseason anyway as well. So even if the Saints were to go on an unprecedented tear in the playoffs, doesn't seem likely you're going to see Cesar Ruiz again this year. And as you can see here, with Alvin Kamara finding the most success in his run game, running to either side of Cesar Ruiz, and Cesar Ruiz playing the most amount of snaps, the largest amount of snaps amongst 6 offensive linemen for the New Orleans Saints, but giving up the second fewest pressures amongst those offensive linemen, obviously has a big impact in the passing game as well. So this is one of the other reasons why I believe that moving James Hurst to right guard and then starting Trevor Penning could be a good move for you, because Calvin Throckmorton has given up 14 total pressures on, so as many pressures as Cesar Ruiz on half the snaps, on less than half the snaps, 215 snaps in pass blocking for Calvin Throckmorton, 516. So 301 fewer snaps, but the same amount of pressures. That's why I lean a little bit more towards having James Hurst kick inside, get a look at Trevor Penning on the outside, but we'll see. We'll see which way the New Orleans Saints go with all of it. Speaking of efficiency, could it be that efficiency or a lack of efficiency in the screen game is why those numbers that we ran in yesterday's episode are what they are for the New Orleans Saints, who have run the least amount of screen passes in the NFL? I broke it down, and I'll give you the results here as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at Total Wine and More. I love Total Wine and More. I go to the one over on Veterans in Metairie all the time. They've got my Uncle Nearest whiskey. They've got my favorite wines. They've got everything, and they've got everything that you love as well. I can almost guarantee it. So this holiday, find what you love over at Total Wine and More. With so many great bottles to choose from, it's easy to find your new favorite single barrel bourbon, or maybe you already know what your favorite bourbon is. You'll be able to find it there. You can also find perfect gifts for everyone on your list and get some help from a friendly guide, because Total Wine and More has great customer service as well. And hey, don't forget, you deserve a gift this holiday season as well. So you get all the confidence in the world knowing that you're going to find what you're looking for and find something special at the lowest price. Love what you find what you love, only at Total Wine and More. Curbside pickup and delivery are available in most areas. Visit TotalWine.com to learn more. Spirits not sold in Virginia or North Carolina. Drink responsibly and be 21. Let's get it. Who Dat Nation, wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with a look at or a deeper dive into screen passes. And we're going to continue to do this actually over the course of the week because I just think this is such an intriguing topic, right? This idea that the Saints are trying to find these creative ways to get Alvin Kamara more involved, but then the severe lack of screen passes in this game. So just as a review, or in their games so far this season, just as a review, for those of you that didn't catch one of the Tuesday episodes, the Saints have run the fewest screen passes in the entire NFL, 26 screen passes. Right above them are the Dallas Cowboys, who were at 28 ahead of Week 15. The Miami Dolphins at 30 ahead of Week 15. They didn't add much, either of those teams. And the New Orleans Saints didn't run a single screen pass in Week 15. So they're at the bottom of the NFL still. So I thought maybe, okay, well, is it inefficiency, right? Is it that they've run some, didn't really work out, so maybe that's why they've kind of steered away from it and maybe feel that they have a better option. Andy Dalton has certainly done a good job at attacking the intermediate area of the field, and they've gotten a little bit more aggressive with that on third downs, which is something that we had kind of been calling for as well. So could it just be that they ran these and that they weren't very efficient off of it? So what I did was that I compared the Saints screen numbers, bottom of the NFL, in terms of attempts, to the Miami Dolphins, who were also in that bottom area. And what I found is that the Saints have actually kind of on average been more successful with screen passes than the Miami Dolphins. But the Miami Dolphins offense so remarkably creative that there's a lot of different things that they do in their game with a Tyreek Hill or a Jalen Waddle or the other weapons that they have that allow them to kind of have all of these other alternative screen passes. The Saints offense, not really as creative as a Mike McDaniel's offense, as a Kyle Shanahan system offense. So it's not an efficiency. The Saints with Andy Dalton ran 18 screen passes in terms of attempts. They completed 14. 126 yards, an average of 7 yards per attempt. That's pretty good. They also had a touchdown there. Tua Tagovailoa has also attempted 19, so one more, completed 3 more than Andy Dalton at 17. 94 yards, only an average of 4.9 yards per attempt, also a touchdown. So what you're seeing here is that the Saints are actually more efficient than some of the other teams that are at the bottom of this metric in terms of fewest screen passes attempted. They're more efficient there, but they're not running the screen passes. Now, if you look at Jameis Winston only attempted 6 screen passes over the course of his games, completed 5 of them. One of them was batted down. Only 9 yards, 1.5 yard per attempt on those. And I'll tell you why that is here in just a second. Teddy Bridgewater, who we discussed earlier for the Miami Dolphins, attempted 5, completed 3 for 63 yards, 12.6% or 12.6 yards per attempt and a touchdown. So he had a big one break. So all in all, outside of a splash couple or one for Teddy Bridgewater, who's been running screens his entire career, right? Andy Dalton is actually has been the most efficient at running those screen options when they're called for the New Orleans Saints. But why not Jameis Winston? What happened there? It's actually really easy to see. The way that a screen pass works is that usually you snap the ball, and if it's a running back, the running back breaks to the outside. Maybe everybody kind of holds up, pretends like they're going to, run block, and then they start to break to the outside. But whoever the receiver is usually has a screen of blockers out in front of them. The pass usually is caught in the backfield and then advanced by that ball carrier with the screen of blockers ahead of them. Where that pass is caught will have a lot to do with what's successful and what's not successful in the screen game. So for instance, what you'll oftentimes see is around 2.5 to 3 yards behind the line of scrimmages where screen passes are most commonly caught, somewhere in that range. Tua Tagovailoa's average depth of target on screen passes 2.4, so actually a little bit in advance of that range. Andy Dalton's 2.9, right about where you would expect. Teddy Bridgewater, 2.8, right about where you would expect. Jameis Winston, however, for some reason, 3.8 yards behind the line of scrimmage. Nearly 4 yards behind the line of scrimmage was the average completion, or the average depth of target, not even completion, average depth of target on screen passes. So that could be that it's called a certain way. That could be, some issues executing early on in the season. It could be the style. Maybe he's run more halfback screens in his average than wide receiver screens, which tend to be a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage, and intends to even those things out. Whatever it is, that's one of the reasons why early in the season, the Saints weren't as successful with the screen pass. But now, when you're getting those screen passes an average of an entire yard ahead, there's not really any reason to steer away from them. So even early season success with one, or lack of success with one quarterback, shouldn't translate to an unwillingness to run it with a different quarterback who's seeing more success in that area of the game. And let me just be very clear, because I know people get weird when people talk about Jameis Winston and Andy Dalton and all these other things. I'm not saying that either one of these things is that one quarterback is running it better. What I'm saying is that when one quarterback was at the helm, it was inefficient. When another quarterback is at the helm, it hasn't been inefficient. That could be because of system. That could be because of play call. That could be because of depth of target. That could be because of the receivers. That could be because of the screen blockers. That could be because of the efficiency or the ability of running the play. It could be the defense. It could be any number of things. All that I'm saying, though, is that if you struggled with it early on in the season and you're finding success with it later on in the season, then you shouldn't be staying away from it anymore, and you shouldn't be as sort of subject to your criteria of running it. Now, again, like I mentioned the other day, it could simply be that the New Orleans Saints have a very specific criteria for when they run those screen passes. But if you're trying to be more creative and find ways to utilize Alvin Kamara in space, screen pass is a really, really good way to do it. So maybe getting back to some of those could be helpful. Coming up later on today, answered some of the biggest questions around the New Orleans Saints for our second episode. So we'll continue to look at quarterbacks. We'll continue to look at Alvin Kamara, and we'll also continue to take a look at what the New Orleans Saints would do if Chris Olave isn't able to go this weekend against the Cleveland Browns. Would have missed practice on Tuesday with a hamstring injury. So what could that mean for the New Orleans Saints? We'll break that down in tonight's episode as we continue on rolling through here with 2-a-days. And in 2-a-days, go on a pause on Thursday and Friday, 1-a-day Thursday and Friday, and we're back to 2-a-days on Monday. So we'll have all that coming up for you here in just a little bit. So I appreciate you very much for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day. Don't forget, for your second listen, to go and check out Locked On Sports today. Get all the biggest stories around the world of sports from the Locked On local experts, giving you that insight the way that only Locked On can provide. Available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. Appreciate you as always making me part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.